Most people are known for something. When you see their faces or hear their names, you think something, feel something. Those thoughts and feelings are shaped by how they act, what they say, and how they treat people. What about Christians? What do people think and feel when they see a church? Hear God's name, or spend time around people who call themselves Christians? The better question is, how should they be viewed? How should they be known? How should they be branded?
So last week, we started talking about this idea of being branded. The idea that every product, every organization, and every group of people have something that they're known for. In fact, if you remember, we threw out some brands last week, and you guys said the first things that came into your minds, and whether those things or those emotions were positive or negative. And remember, we threw out some brands last week, and you guys said the first things that came to your minds, and whether those things or those emotions were positive or negative. And you could go down the line of your brands that you encounter any given day and do the same thing. But here's the deal. What we said was that the same thing actually goes for Christians. That there are just some things that we ought to be known for. There are some things that we were intended to be known for. There are some beliefs and behaviors that should brand us as well. And in order to uncover some of those characteristics, in order to sort of unearth the brand that should be Christianity, we began unpacking Philippians chapter 2. And last week we looked at where Paul said this. He said, "Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose." And from this verse, we decided that one of the things that Christians should be known for, one of the things that should be true of our brand, is that we are unified. That Jesus has given us the task or the goal of leading people towards a relationship with Him. And when we do that together, we can accomplish way more together than we ever could apart. And so we realize that one of the things that should be true of our brand, one of the things that people should feel or sense or understand whenever they come around us is that, oh wow, these people are unified. When I think Christian, I think unified. And this week we're going to look at another characteristic that we must be known for, that has to be a part of our brand. In fact, without this characteristic, it would actually be impossible for us to accomplish the goal that we started out with in week 1. So to get us started here, here's what I want you to do. Think about some brands that you know and trust, like Starbucks or Apple or YouTube or Disney, etc. Isn't it true that you have some certain expectation about what your interaction with that brand is going to be like? Like Starbucks, for example. When you think Starbucks, when you go to Starbucks, you expect to have a delicious drink, and a cool, comfortable environment to hang out in with your friends. You expect to have an experience that leads to great taste and good conversation. That's just what goes along with the name Starbucks. Or take Apple, for example. With Apple products, you expect technology that is on the cutting edge, and that not only is advanced, but also like user-friendly enough for your 3-year-old little sister to navigate and find her favorite games. That's just what Apple does. It's what you expect. Or with Disney, it's the same deal. You expect magic, whether it's a movie that brings out the wonder in adults as much as it does in kids, or an amusement park that creates the best family memories you've ever had, you expect something wonderful, something magical, something Disney when you go to Disney. But here's the question. Where are those expectations coming from? And isn't it true that they're based on the fact that either you've been there before or someone told you about it? Like you've been there before, or you know someone who has been there, they told you about it, and so when you went, you walked in with some expectations. Oh, I bet it's going to be like blank, like this. And coincidentally, the same goes for Christians. The same goes for church. The same goes for your youth group. Christians, in general, are perceived a certain way by our culture because of the way that Christians have treated people in the past. Like churches are known in a community that they are in as being a certain way because of the interactions people in that community have had with the church in the past, or what people have told other people about that church. Even different youth groups have like a buzz around school of what you could expect when you go there because of what other students say, who've been there before. Oh yeah, I've been there. It was like this. Oh yeah, I've heard about that church. So that happens with churches and it happens with Christians too. So let me ask you, How do your friends or your family or your neighbors, or how do people you know who aren't Christians view Christians? How do they view church? And isn't it true, fair or unfair, isn't it true that Christians sometimes have a negative brand, right? I mean, don't some people, whether people you know or just culture, in general, don't some people just assume that Christians are going to be self-righteous, judgmental, closed-minded, and maybe worst of all, boring? Have you ever met someone who just assumed that? And the reason most people have their minds made up about church and about Christians is simply because they've either been there before or they knew someone who went and they had a negative experience. And this negative experience is what shaped their perspective on church and on us as Christians. Now think about it. You've seen this in your own world. Like, you've seen this go down at school, I bet. Like, maybe you were in a conversation at school, you heard some people talking at the lunchroom table, and some guy was talking about how his mom made him go to church, and it was, like, terrible. It was, like, so boring. I drooled all over the place. And then people there were so judgmental that, like, they were judging me for how I looked, and everyone around's going like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go there, Or maybe you've seen it play out in your own family. Like, maybe you're the only person in your family that's actually trying to get closer to God right now. And some of your family members just don't get that because, like, they went to church at some point and it was not a good experience for them. And so they really can't understand why you would want to make church such a priority. And so they're like, dude, I don't get it. Like, you've seen that happen. Or maybe you've even felt it at church yourself. Like, I bet it might have been like the time you invited a friend and like they came with you and you're cringing the whole time, because nobody made them feel welcome, or maybe even nobody acknowledged they were there, or maybe they got judged, or maybe what was happening was like boring and you're like, oh my gosh, and maybe some of you have even developed negative feelings about church based on, the people you love or the people how they've been treated. Well, believe it or not, despite how many of us may feel about the brand church, church is not supposed to be like this. It's not supposed to be known for either being boring or judgmental or we don't like you or we don't want you. No, in fact, it's supposed to be just the opposite. It's supposed to be an incredible brand. And last week we decided that, we want to be a group that's unified around a common mission. And that mission is to help people connect with God and with other people and to meet each other's needs. And that's awesome. I think that's a really cool brand to have. But a huge roadblock to accomplishing that goal and being that brand is simply the perception of Christians as being self-absorbed, not accepting of those who are not like us, and judgmental of people who live differently. And if we're ever going to accomplish like our goals of reaching others and making a difference in their lives, then our reputation has to change. We have to find a way to rebrand us. Now, there's really only one thing that can change the way that we are perceived. And that is simply when we decide to change the way we treat people. It's when we decide to change the way we interact with our community or with our friends or with our school. It's when we decide to change the way we relate to people on a daily basis. That's how you change our brand. And I know that sounds great, but the question we should ask tonight is, how do we do that? Like, what does that look like when you go to school? How would you rebrand yourself when you're hanging out with your family, or when you're playing sports, or when you're working at, your job? What do you do? How do you rebrand Christianity? And the Bible actually has a ton to say about how we view and treat others. Cover to cover, man, it is packed with commandments and promises that are related to loving others. And in fact, the passage we're looking at today does just that. We're going to go back to Philippians 2. Where we were last week, and it's almost as if Paul anticipated this problem with our brand as Christians, and he tells us what we need to do about it. Take a look what he says. He says this: don't be selfish. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. I know we read that verse and you're like, yeah, well, it sounds great, but unfortunately, isn't this true? That is the exact opposite of the way most of us live our lives. I mean, isn't that true? Like, we don't really mean to do this, but like, gosh, come on. Even as Christians, most of us are so wrapped up in our own little worlds and our own needs that it's hard to pay attention to the needs of others around us. Like, most of us are so consumed with me that it's hard to pay a whole lot of attention to them, We have enough going on with ourselves to have much energy left to devote to others. That's how most of us live. But in this passage, Paul says, what you got to get, what you got to do, what I really want to challenge you to do is to flip that. What you got to do is you got to start thinking of others before yourself. You got to start looking at others' interests before your own. You have to start living, Christians, selflessly. That's the brand. In addition to being unified, you should be known as a group of people who are selfless. Wow, those people are so selfless. And I know living unselfishly seems kind of counterintuitive. You're like, no, I got to look out for me and mine. You know, I can't afford to not care about my own needs and put someone's before mine. It seems a little dangerous. But I'm telling you, there are actually tons of benefits to putting others first. Even if you're not a believer, even if you're not sure you're a Christian, there is a huge benefit to living life this way. For example, people will trust you more. It's true. If you become known as someone who puts the needs of others above yourself, people will trust you more because they believe you have their best interest in mind. Not only that, people will like you more. 100%. I mean, think about the people you like to be around. They're usually almost always people you consider humble and generous and considerate. Like you feel like they have a genuine interest in you and not just themselves. People that are just interested in themselves, you don't trust and you don't like as much. Not only that, but people will respect you more if you do this. I promise you. We tend to lose respect for people for people who appear to only be concerned with their own needs and are willing to do anything like to get those needs, including throwing you under the bus. The people we respect, no, they're the people that sacrifice their own desires for the good of others. People will respect you more. And lastly, you'll gain influence. If you live this way, you will gain more influence. A huge byproduct of living unselfishly is that the perception others have of us will change, and we'll actually begin to make some headway in accomplishing our mission of reaching others. Like people will be influenced more by you. You'll be a better leader, you know? So those are all beneficial byproducts for anyone. I mean, Christian and non-Christian, who is interested in rebranding themselves, who is interested in living selfishly. Those are the great things that happen when a group of people, or maybe a lot of people, decide to do it. It's pretty incredible. But for those of us who call ourselves Christ followers, there's an even deeper motivation and a higher calling. There's more to this passage than what we just read. In fact, in the very next verse, it says this right here. You, church, Christians, you must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. And what kind of attitude did he have? Jesus spent his entire life and ministry putting others first, accepting outcasts, sacrificing his own comfort, and eventually his own life for others. I mean, the essence of Jesus Christ was completely selfless. That's how he spent his whole ministry and his whole life. And so if we're going to call ourselves Christ followers, that means that we actually have to start striving to look like Jesus in the way that we live. And that means being selfless. You and I, we need to be selfless if we're going to follow Jesus. That shouldn't be a part of our brand. So what does that look like in today's world? What does that look like for you at school or at home or on your team or at your job? What would you have to do if you truly wanted to be, Christians branded by unselfishness? Here's what it may look like. It may mean that we begin to associate with outcasts. Most of us were so concerned with our own reputation that the idea of associating with people we consider below us kind of terrifies us. You're like, I don't know if I can survive hanging out with uncool people. But that didn't stop Jesus. That's not how he rolled, There were people around Jesus all the time who others considered beneath him, others considered outcasts. And Paul says we should have the same attitude as Jesus. We should take our cues from him. Go sit at the lunch table with someone you typically avoid. Offer a seat on the bus to someone who has no one else to sit with. Invite a classmate to be part of your group project who you normally wouldn't, have in your group to begin with. Think outside the box. Think outside your circle. Start looking for ways to tune in with people around you. Or maybe for others of us, the best way is to, simply just stop talking so much. In fact, Jesus didn't spend all that much time in the Gospels having to persuade people to believe in him, I mean, he did, but more of the time, he simply just spent putting other people first. Like, he was so selfless, and people couldn't help but ask, dude, who is this guy? What is this guy about? I mean, it's incredible. And that was how most people started following him, just by watching. And so, maybe a lot of us could follow that example and, start talking a little less and start listening more. Like, who are the people around you? What's going on in their world? What do they have to say? What are they thinking? because they're more important. I'm going to be selfless. And we could go on. There are a lot more examples, and you could think of more, and maybe tonight or today or whatever, you could think of some more examples. But when you start to get into the practical application of this, you kind of go like, wow. Like, what if we actually did that? That would be pretty cool. People would really like it if we started to live a little bit more that way. But even bigger deal, like if we started to do all these things, we could slowly start to change the perception of how Christians are viewed. I mean, we could rebrand church. We could rebrand Christianity. And it could start in our families, it could start in our schools, it could start in our neighborhoods, and then just begin to grow. I mean, what if Christians were rebranded everywhere? I mean, what if enough of us started to do this, that not just in one little spot, but everywhere, because of the attitude we started to model here and now, our whole brand changed in America. Our whole brand began to change around the world. How incredible would that be? It would just be amazing. I mean, how would that literally change our world if Christians were not only known for being unified, but we were known, branded for being unselfish, selfless? So, today, as you're heading out, here's my challenge. I want you to be thinking of how you can begin changing the brand of Christianity in the world around you. And then start having the same attitude of Jesus. Go do it. We should be known for having the same attitude as Jesus Christ. We should be known as a group of people who are selfless. Let's start rebranding.